So today's webinar, we are going to talk about basic reporting. So this will have us talking about default reports and enhanced reports, basically predefined and custom reports. We're going to talk about how to run default reports, how to copy default reports, how to schedule default reports, and then we're going to get into enhanced reports, specifically how to make them, how to edit them. We're going to talk about two of the different kinds of enhanced reports, so specifically express reports and standard. And then we'll cover, how to work with a little bit of formatting when editing them, a little bit on formulas, grouping, and a few things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. So for default reports, we go to the main menu, default reports. So these are basically the reports that come with the system. They're ones that we have created for you and are actually available, if you need a new one, can be requested. So if you need any modifications to these that you think would benefit everybody, or you have an idea for a report that you think would benefit everybody, support@fundly.com, totally available to take requests. Otherwise, let's go through how to run them. So I'm going to go ahead and use the donation reports that we have available and run a couple of these. So the default reports are broken up into sections. Most of them are pretty straightforward: donations, events, financials, grants, things like that. Here I am in donations, so I'm going to make use of our donation report. It's a pretty basic report. So with a report, if you're not certain what it does, there is this little help icon, and it'll bring up a description. So nothing too fancy here. Not every report has a description, but if you ever notice the description's wrong, let me know. Happened once. So with these, we can go ahead and execute them just by hitting the execute button. This will give it in the default format. If I need it in a different format, then I can execute as one of them. I think a lot of them default to PDF, but you can also get them in Excel and CSV, which are spreadsheet formats, RTF, basically a Word document, or HTML, which will open up here in the browser. So let's execute as PDF. And when I execute a report, it will open up the filters. Now, depending on how the report was built, will depend on what filters you have available. Some filters, some reports will actually let you do some modifications to the filters that you have. Others, it's a bit more locked in. So in this case, this is what we call a basic filter screen, but it lets you change the operators. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Depends on how it was built. So in this case, we go ahead and say what we want to filter on. This is a donation report, so it's all donation-based information, although we can also filter by contact ID, which would let us put up the donations for a single person. So in this case, gift type, date range, fund, source, so on and so forth, amount, are our search criteria. Right now, this is defaulting to searching for everything for this year that's above $0. This is a one-time amount, not a cumulative amount. We'll talk about that later, but at the moment, through filters, we cannot search by cumulative donation amounts. In the advanced, I think it's the advanced one, tomorrow, we'll talk a bit more how we can handle that in a report itself. But let's go ahead and set this for, I should have some, this is my demo system, so I should have some stuff for this year. So let's go run with the defaults and see what we get. So it's going to give us this execution progress, kind of gives you a sense of where you are, initializing, fetching data, formatting data, and generating report, creating, transmitting data, so on and so forth. So almost done here. This one doesn't take too long. There is a trick I'm going to show you later for if you know a report's going to take a really long time to be able to run it on the back end and get it emailed to you when it's complete, because you don't want to sit around for 25 minutes as you churn through a million records. In my case, I only have a couple thousand, I believe, to churn through. So we are running slow. What is going on? Okay, so I went ahead and did it as an Excel instead. So let's go ahead and open that up. All right, and here's our document. Cool. That was just an issue with PDF. So, and here's a report. So we have the donors, date range for the date range, so everything's in 2016 as specified, and everything's over $0 because the donation's always over 0. And then in this particular case, the report also gives you the fund, the program, the campaign, the event, the gift sort, and the tribute information. It's just about everything you need on that donation. So that's working with a default report. Let me that aside. And we'll go ahead and close that out. So that's just running a default report, nothing fancy there, and different formats. So what happens, as I mentioned, when you know that report's going to take a really long time, or you want to get that report every morning? Well, for that, we can actually schedule a report. So let's do that. Schedule report. So when we schedule a report, we're basically telling the system, we're going to set this up once, and you're going to do it on the back end. And when it's done, send us the information. So we can set this to repeat, or we can set it to be like one time and to send us the results immediately. And that's what we do if we know our data is going to take like 5, 10, 20 minutes to churn, millions of records. So we give our report a schedule name. So let's call this the daily donation report. We're going to say what format we want it in, which will change some of our form options because, for example, PDFs can be password protected. Let's go Excel. Execute immediately says just run it right now. Bam, run it, email it, we're done. Otherwise, we can schedule it. We can say run it at a specific time, repeating every, say, hour. It's kind of weird, but you might do that throughout the day if you're a really busy organization. And then how often do we want this to recur? So this would, for example, say run it, let's see, at 10 now, run it at 11 a.m. And do this once, do this daily, every one day, starting, say, today, and either not ending or ending at some point in the future. So this is how we could do a report that runs every morning and maybe shows you the donations from yesterday. So this is how we set it. Next step is our filters. So here we actually get to add and remove filters. So we didn't get to do that previously, and we'll see more about filters in a little bit. But here we can say, okay, well, we want the gift date to be the day before. So equal to, and we can actually use a formula and say yesterday. That's not yesterday. I need to check that. That's anyway, yesterday. I'm not sure why it's dating it from yesterday. For yesterday. Today. Apparently it thinks today is the 26th. I need to look into that. Anyway, so what this would do is it would run the report for the date specified, and since I used a function, it's always going to be today or yesterday, what have you, and it will email it to me that day. So with this scheduling piece, you can have yourself or your ED or whomever receive, let me set the recipients here, an email every day, every month, every week that gives donation information, event information, financial information. So you could run a financial report and have it emailed to your accountant every Monday for the week before, whatever you need to do, and it will get done automatically. So it's pretty cool. Any questions about scheduling? Okay, so that's scheduling. I'm going to move along. If you ever need to cancel a schedule, though, that's a bit of a quirk. Unfortunately, due to the way it's set up, you have to contact us at support at fundly.com. Let us know what the report was either called, preferably what it's called, what report it's based on, and any like the recurring information. We can find it and shut it down, or make modifications if something went awry. So unfortunately, it's not automated yet, so that you can do it, but something we'll work on for the future. So that's default reports. The only other thing for default reports is copying. So a default report and enhanced report are effectively the same thing. It's just whether it came with the system or not. So if you copy a default report, it will get added to your enhanced report list and you can edit it. So if that donation report is almost what you need, but you want soft credit information added to it, I could copy this report and add it, and say, change the name and say, with soft credit, SC, copy, and it's going to get added to my enhanced report list, and I can make modifications to it. So that brings us now into the next topic of enhanced reports. So at the moment, it's going to move it into my enhanced report list, and I think it's going to open it up. I don't copy a lot of default reports. Just give it a second to move the data around. Here is our donation report with soft credit, and I can now edit it. So let us talk about enhanced reports. Okay, actually, so I clicked on it. It's going to open. And here's our editor. Don't be afraid, we're going to play with this in a few minutes, but this is what we call a standard report and the standard report editor. This is where all the power is, but we're going to talk about express reports before we get here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. But this is where I could add in another column, bring in my data, whatever I need to. So let's close this out. So enhanced reports. Enhanced reports, that's how we get there. You may notice if you will not have this view all option, by the way. That's, if you're wondering where that comes from, that's mine. It supports there, but that's how we can make enhanced default reports and make you enhanced reports. So if you're wondering where that is, it's not on your system. But anyway, so enhanced reports, we can do all the things we can do with a standard report. We can execute in various formats, but now we can also edit and delete. So this, with soft credit, I'm going to go ahead and delete this and make it go away. So it'll still exist in default because this is just a copy of it, but it will remove it from my enhanced report list. Or it would if it refreshed. Okay, it didn't. Oh, there we go. I'm being impatient. So edit, delete. But the real fun here is the fact that you can make your own reports. So let's talk about the two reports that we're going to work with today. Express reports and standard reports. We will talk about crosstab reports in the advanced webinar, and eventually we'll talk about dashboard reports. But most people, need either express or standards. So an express report is basically a wizard-based report creation process. It is really good for basic lists. So a basic donation list, contact list, based on certain criteria. So we're going to create an express report list. Express report just now. Express reports also kind of give you the foundation for standard reports. So everything we learned for Express, we're going to use in standard. Like standard just gives you a more advanced editor in the end. So new Express report, and let's go ahead and build a donation report. So with this donation report today, we're going to start with a basic list of donations, kind of like that donation report we saw. And then we're going to work with grouping in our standard report and summation. So that's what I'm going to call it for in standard. So let's create our Express report. So we're going to load up the wizard, and we're going to start with a report name. So let's call this the webinar donation report. And then we're going to put it into a directory. Now, nothing fancy there. You're going to notice that it says Nonprofit Easy, then your organization's name, and you'll have no further breakdown from there, but you will see your other reports. If you do find that you have got a bazillion different reports and you would love to be able to categorize them, so you wish you had like 1 or 2 folders, shoot us an email, support@fundly.com. We can add a folder or 2 to your folder to help you organize. So if you have like maybe 3 different departments, that's totally doable. So feel free to put in that request if you find it's necessary. So I'm just going to dump it in here, and then the report description. A report of donations as line items. Nothing fancy there. Next step. So we're going to move on in our wizard, and we'll talk about categories. So what are categories? Categories, or data categories, is I think the official title, are basically what you're looking at, what you're going to work with. So data categories are, categories of data, and within these categories are the actual data fields. So contact here. My guess is, this is going to have contact information. I can actually click on the little eye here and I can see what's in that. This is actually probably the most prominent and most used of your categories. And this is all the information for a given contact. Now there's a lot of categories here. Contact with contact types. So if you want to start playing with contact types, billing address information, mailing address, household view, all sorts of stuff. So some of this, we can talk about at a later date. Some of it's pretty straightforward. Seasonal address, we'll look at seasonal address information. For today, we're going to play with contact. So we're going to need contact data because we want to know who the donor is. And we want to know donation information. Now notice how some of these get grayed out. So some data categories are incompatible with others. So donation. And then sometimes when you add a category, it actually will make things more available. So the system actually tries to figure out what you're up to as you go. So this is both good and bad. It's good because it saves you a lot of work. You don't have to program anything per se. But it can be problematic because it's trying to guess what you're up to. So we have to be clear as best we can on what we're up to. So my advice to help that along is with categories, only put the ones you need and be very clear on what you need. So for a donation report, what do I need? Well, I want to show the donations and I want to know who the donor is, contact and donation. I do not, however, need to pull in event information because if I try to do that, things will get funny. It is doable. I built such a report, but you got to be, clear, what you're pulling, and the system's going to try and guess what you're up to. So if I try to put contact, donation, and event information, it's going to think that, okay, maybe I'm doing some sort of attendee list of registrants for an event and their donations, but that might not be what you're trying to do. So that's why you kind of want to be very discreet with the report making. And not try to get too much in one. An example, I think she's here today, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. That actually came up was someone is attempting to make a financial report where for the donations, it shows the campaign and program. And for a human, it's actually pretty straightforward. And I think it is possible in the end. But for the computer, when you start putting contact, donation, and financial information together, it's not entirely certain what you're up to with that. So we got odd results. So not to say that's not possible. It's just you got to be careful. So just going to a word of warning. I'm rambling on about that, so let's move on. Do know that if you do want donation financials, there is the donation transactions category. So I can combine this in here and actually get the payment information for those donations and so on. So let's set that aside. So today, all we need is contact and donation. So next step. So that's our category. We're not saying how we're using it. We're just saying that we will use it in one of the next 3 steps. So the next step is our sorts. How will the data be sorted or grouped when the time comes? Now, we're not going to do any sorting or grouping right now. What I think I will do, however, is I will actually do one sort. I'm going to do a sort by donation date. So what this will do right now is my resulting list of donations will be sorted by donation date in ascending order. So sorts will also be used when I start grouping. So I might end up later also needing to put, if we're going to group by, say, fund or program, I would need to put those in. So it'll sort and then we'll do grouping. We'll come back to that. So for the time being, let's just sort by donation date. So nothing more to do there. It will sort from top to bottom. So it would sort by date, and then I could put by fund if I wanted to. Or, I could do fund and then by date. So it would have all the artist fund first and then put them in date order. And then it would give me the building fund and then put those in date order. But let's not do that yet. So next, filters. We saw these earlier. In fact, this might be somewhat familiar. So what we do here is we say, what data categories do we want to filter by? So once again, we got to be careful not putting the things that don't make sense together. So we're looking at donations. So we want to filter by donation information. We wouldn't filter necessarily by contact address. You could, but it's kind of weird. So we would select the donation category and say what we want to filter by. So what might we want to filter by in a donation report? Well, what we saw before was basically everything. But we could say, I want to filter by the date of the donation, and I may want to filter by what fund it's recorded against, and maybe the amounts. So, as I mentioned, amount is not cumulative; it's one time. So maybe I'm looking for one-time donations over certain amounts. So from here, we have our filters. Well, we want to go ahead and say how we want to use these filters. So donation date is currently set to with the operator of equal to. The donation has to be on that date. Something more useful for dates is in between. And you could put a default date range, which I'm going to actually go ahead and do. So I'm going to go ahead and use the function ability I used earlier and say first day of current year till the last day of current year. And that'll default it so I don't have to set it later. This can be overridden by the user if I say prompt for value. So this prompt for value is how you can hard code a filter. So if you've built a report that is for individual contacts only, there's no organization information, it's not set up for organizations, it couldn't handle organizations, I actually could put in a filter for, where is it? Where is the filter? Is individual organization. What this criteria does is let me filter on whether or not the contacts are individuals or organizations. And so you can that's some example of something you might hard code in. But anyway, not gonna do that here. So prompt for value means we will be asking the user what the values will be. If we don't have that marked, then it won't be asked. So let's go ahead and make sure all these are prompt for value. There's one other thing is group with next filter. So you may actually see down here, this is actually the logic of our filters worked out. This and this and this and this. Well, we can change that to OR statement. So I could actually say donation date is in the range and fund is this, or the donation amount is that. So I could say fund is ORed and with the next statement. So this will change our logic. So what this actually does now is says the donation date is in between and the fund is equal to something, or the donation date is equal, the donation amount is equal to something. So we can actually start getting pretty complex by doing ands and ors. We're not going to do that right now, but you can. So let's go back to and, not with the group, and I'm going to leave these blank. So right now, if these are blank, they don't really affect the report. Okay. So any questions about filters? Any so far? Actually been pretty quiet. I know I muted everybody, but you should be unmute yourself. Otherwise, there's a chat dialogue. Okay. Well, let's keep moving on. And so we now have our filters. This will filter by the data and we'll reduce the records that come up. This doesn't determine what we see. This comes up a lot in reports. So your filter says what row, what entry will be available. Your layout is going to tell you what you're going to see. So it will bring up donation number 42. But what we see about donation number 42 is determined by our layout. So this is pretty straightforward. It's drag and drop. So in our report, we want to see who the donor is. All right, contact name. All right. And we want to see the date of the donation. We want to see the fund. We want to see the program. And you just keep dragging and dropping. Say soft credit, always a fun one. Is it a recurring donation? This is a true false, I believe. And the all important amount. I'm going to put that next to date. So we can move things around, so on and so forth. We can also put functions on this data. We're going to talk about these a bit later. So just know you can do that in here. And for the time being, we're not going to do summary from here. We're going to do that in a standard report because it comes out a little funky in an Express. But here we have it. This is our report. We were able to make a donation report and determine what we see. So we have the contact's name, the donation date, the amount, the fund, the program, soft credit info, and is it a recurring donation? And at this point, I can save this. And I'm going to run the report as a PDF. So let's take a peek at it and see what we got. So as we saw earlier, it's going to have the criteria that I set. I'm going to run with the default values. It is going to let me add and remove filters if I want to. I actually can show you how to restrict that, but for the time being, we don't need to worry about that. Report's complete. Give me my PDF. A little trouble with PDF earlier. Nope, it's behaving good. And here it is. So nothing fancy going on here. We haven't done any formatting, but here's the raw data. Raiden Lee, on this date, gave us 100. We know it's $100. Fund, program, no soft credit. It is not a recurring donation. And that's our report. Nothing too fancy. Okay, so that's Express reports. So I'm going to do a little bit of formatting here just to show it off, how to do it in an Express report, and then we're going to move into a standard report. So down here we have our layout. I can go ahead and say donation amount is going to be formatted. So this is our format cells, similar to Excel, as a number, 2 decimal places, and a $sign. So now that will actually show $sign. And then maybe I want to, I held the shift button there just now, shift, clicked. I want to bold this and make sure it's centered, already done. It already was bolded. And so on and so forth. So basic formatting, if you know how to work Excel and or Word, these formatting options should be very familiar to you. So let's go ahead and save. And let's move on to a standard report. So one thing we can do is I can either make a new standard report, or I can actually convert this under advanced from express to standard. So when I create a standard report, it actually starts with this editor. So when I go to enhanced reports and click on new standard report, we start with an express report, and then it will automatically convert it to a standard report. So it's as if I click this button. So I'm going to go ahead and just transfer that one into a standard report, and it brings up the standard report editor. So I'm going to close this out for just a minute, save and close, and I'm going to show you where the button is to create a new one. So just to refresh us. So standard report. And like I said, it'll bring up the wizard, but I want to show it to you because seeing is believing. Oop, I paused record. Oh, whatever. So let's bring that report back up that we were working on. Donation report for webinar, or what did I call that again? Is it webinar report? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and edit the report we created earlier that is currently already a standard report. All right, so this is the standard report editor. And it can do everything that the wizard can do and more. So the real power is in standard reports, because in standard reports, we can start having more control over format. We can start using formulas. Well, we could before, but we can do it more properly. More properly, that's grammar. We can do it more powerfully here. We can still do all the same things we could do with categories and sorts and all that, but now we can also play with grouping and summation and various other cool features, including dropping cells if data is conditional formatting, all sorts of cool things. So let's start a little bit with how to do the things we could do before. So here we have the report options menu, and this is where we find rename, description, setting our categories, adding sorts, filters. So these are all the things we had before. So if I go to filters, it's going to bring up the same filter window I had before. So it's all still there. So let's see, what do we want to do in our standard report that we didn't do before? So let's start with just some basic stuff. Let's say we want to add more columns. Now we can't just drag and drop, so that's actually a little harder because we now have more power. So how would I go about adding more data about this donation? Well, if you've used Excel, it's pretty similar. Right-click on your column, insert after, insert before. Then from over here, pick your data category, find your field, and let's see, what do we not have? Gift memo, let's do that. Gift source, I don't have gift source. So drag and drop, and then put in your header, gift source, and then format, center and bold. So that's not too hard. I can delete a column, delete column. I can select multiple, I hit shift, and merge cells. I can unmerge cells as needed. I can move the columns around. Depending on what format you're going to put this into, though, things may or may not pull through. CSV will not keep any formatting. The others will. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Okay. Samantha, I had a question. I'll answer that at the end, Samantha, if I can. So one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of this webinar, I'm presenting in the CRM, but everything we are learning here is applicable both in the CRM and in Fundly Connect. The data categories available to you will be different depending on which system you're in. Obviously, CRM is gonna have donations while Connect does not. In both systems, you will have access to custom data sets in that system. If it is currently not present, that is a bug being fixed. So actually that answers your question, Samantha, because I answered it right away. So just be aware of that. I forgot to clarify that at the beginning. Everything we're doing here will work in both systems, same functionality, but your data categories will be different. So if you're coming at this from Fundly Connect, think instead of donation, think volunteer or volunteer opportunity. So same ideas, different categories. So okay, let's continue. Should have mentioned that at the beginning. So, so yeah, that was adding, removing columns, grouping, merging cells, removing cells, all that fun stuff. So what can we do now? So most of this we had previously. So the first thing you might want to start doing in a standard report is you might want to start grouping your data. You might be thinking, well, I actually want to see my donations grouped by fund. We talked about that earlier as our example, so that's what we're going to do. I want to see all my funds together so that I can more easily analyze the information. So how do I do that? Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about sections, because that's going to lead us into that. You may notice over here we have this section, and we have two currently, page header and detail. These are only two of a variety of different sections. So page header basically says at the top of every page, this will be shown. We also have a report header, basically saying at the top of the report, so just once, certain information will be shown. We also have footers. Report footer at the bottom of the report, at the very end of the report. Page footer at the bottom of every page. And then we have group header and footer, which we're going to cover in a bit. And we're going to use these when we do our groupings. Grouping, aha, there it is. So at the moment, we just have our page header and our detail. So this is the one I almost forgot to mention. This is basically your details, your line items. So when you pull a row, each donation being its own row, it's going to be put into detail. So this donation will show up detail, put in once, then detail runs again, goes in again, detail runs again, next donation, next donation, next donation. Recursive, I think is the term in this case. Just runs in a loop, pulling it all out, then it's done. So how can we group our details by fund? Now bring us back to that. With that, we have group header and group footer. So earlier, we played with sorts. And I mentioned that these will basically put the data together and sort them. Well, the byproduct of a sort is things that are all the same end up together, i.e. grouped. So sorts are what we do when we start wanting to work with grouping. Now, right now, we're sorting by donation date, which is nice, but you can't group by donation date. Well, you could, but donations, you'd end up with like a bazillion different groups. What we can group by is fund, and that's what we want to. So what I can actually do is say sort by fund, then sort by donation date. And so what this will do visually is when I run the report, it will show all of what the artist fund, and then put those in donation order, donation date order, and so on and so forth. And so that gets you a step in that direction. So let's take this step, see what it looks like, and then take the next step. So fund, art supplies, artist fund, sponsorship, so on and so forth, all in alphabetical order, and then by donation date. So this kind of starts getting you in that direction, but let's take it that step further. Why list the fund 3 times? Why not give it a little header, do a section, show those donations, and then do another section, another section, another section. Kind of start breaking it up. So to do that, we are going to play with group header. So we add, doesn't matter where you click, actually does a little bit, but add a group header, tell it what it's going to be based on, fund, hit OK. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, when I come across a new fund, I'm going to put in this row and then all the donations for that fund. And then the next fund, and then it'll get to the end of those and then start over. It'll give me this row and then give me all the donations for that fund. So right now what this will do is just put a break between each fund. So let's just see that. I like building it up piece by piece. So what this will do is it'll just put that space in between each one. So here's one, space, another one, space, another one, space. So that's nice, but let's take it a step further. So we can put stuff in that header. So as I mentioned, why are we showing the fund each time for each donation when we know that it is per, we're in that section? So what we can actually do is I can say, all right, the fund is only listed once. And let's actually take it a step further. I'm going to do a little bit of formatting here. I'm actually going to insert a row after, and I'm going to move our header into that row. So let's do this. Let's do a little bit of getting fancy here. I'm going to delete that column. And all right, so we got a little bit of fancy here. Donation dot. Oops, I got that backwards. There you go. I'm just clicking and dragging. So what this is going to do, and you didn't use anything we hadn't already done before, except for that insert row, is in my header, I am going to say the fund. I'm going to say the word fund, then say the name of the fund. And then I'm going to have my column headers, because I moved those down. And then I'm going to show the donations for that fund. And then this will all repeat. So let's run that. So a lot of what we do with reports is honestly just formatting. It's just, we have the basic tools of grouping, and we'll see formulas in a few minutes. We have 10 minutes for formulas, so it's going to be a little tight. But most of what we do is formatting. Oh God, this came out terrible. Very, very bold. But here we have the fund, art supplies, the headers, the information, then no space. We do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. So, but now we have a report that's starting to actually take shape. So I'm going to do some quick formatting because, well, this bolding is a little too bold for me. Let's do that. Let's insert a row before so we have a little extra space. And I'm going to do what's called section shading. So this is pretty cool, kind of an aside. In the details section, we can do section shading and we can do alternate colors. So I'm going to add 2, and we're going to go between white and gray. And this is just going to make it look a little prettier. So in fact, I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to I'm going to delete the word fund. I'm going to center this, that, and I'm actually going to make this font size bigger, and I'm going to center it. So I get picky about how things look. And I'm going to, don't need that anymore. Okay, so now let's tidy that up a little bit and see what we get. So what we're going to see is, we can actually get pretty far with formatting to make our reports look nice. Now, at this point, it's not really an Excel accessible report. It's more of a visual report because of the group cells. But yeah, that's looking a little better. So we now have a pretty cool looking report. So let's, in our last 9 minutes, talk about summation, because that's the next important topic, and then we're done for the day. And tomorrow in advance, we'll go deeper into formulas. So how do we do summation? That's our next important thing. So yeah, it's nice that it looks pretty, but what I really want to know is what is the totals? So for our totals, we work with footer. So footer is where we can put summations for all the data between it and its header, its respective header. So I can go add section, group footer, same as we did with the header, by fund, and I can start doing summation. Now summation is done with formulas. So let's do a formula. I'm going to right click insert formula. I'm going to do a crash course in formulas. So here's our formula editor. Over here we have our data categories and our data. Over here we have our functions. Now, anyone who's programmed knows what functions are. Function is basically you put data into it, you get stuff out. Represented usually with the symbol f with a little x, f of x. So our functions over here, particular of interest to are the aggregates. So aggregate means to put things together. So aggregate sum, it means to sum things together. Aggregate count means to count things together. Aggregate average means to average things together. And so here, if we want to do summation, we want an aggregate sum. Now when we click on our function, it's going to tell us how it works. It returns the sum of the values of some data field. So what we can go ahead and do here is click on add sum, hit add, and then say, what do we want to add together? What is our parameters, or our parameters? And our parameter is donation amount. So what this will do is this will add together all the donation amounts for the section. Because like I said, it's going to do everything from basically its header to its footer. So this is AggSum. We can get more complicated. We'll do that tomorrow. And we can start playing with logic, if-then statements, operators, adding things together and concatenating sentences, and so on and so forth. But let's just do AggSum. AggSum, donation amount, OK. And then let's go ahead and format. Because we want to see it as a number with currency. So save that and run. So AggSum in the footer will add together whatever field I specify between this point and this point. So let's run that. And if we have, I don't think we have time for it, but there's a trick I want to show you all. Might have to save it for tomorrow. But here we go. This is our total, and total, and total. And we can take that a step further. Put the word total in there. We can actually, in the report footer as well, report footer. So I'm going to hit Shift, click, hold down Control, drag for copy. And now what this will do is it'll give me the sum per fund and the sum for the entire report. So footer is where you put your summation. Which footer you put in is going to determine what it's summing. A group footer will sum whatever you're grouping by. Report footer will sum for the entire report. All right, and that's that. So that's there's one more thing. I'm going to mention it, but I'll cover it more tomorrow. And that is you don't have to have a detail section. And that's going to sound weird. But right now what we have is a donation detail report. I could make a donation summary report if I wanted to. So how could I do that? Well, what I could do is I could delete the details section and delete even the header section and just put the fund name here, and it would give me the aggregate sum of that fund, and I'd have my totals per fund without the details. So I'm just going to throw that out there for consideration. It's something you can do to make summation reports. You could also group by contact ID. I recommend contact ID over contact name, and I could get summation of donations per donor. So that's a tool. We're going to cover it more tomorrow, but I wanted to make sure people knew about it. But that's our basics today. So we talked about running default reports. We talked about making express reports. We talked about working with standard reports. And with those standard reports, we talked about grouping. We talked about summation. We talked a little bit about formatting. And how we could do a summary level report by removing the details section. So that's everything I have for today. And in the advanced reporting webinar, we'll go a little bit deeper.